petrofocused on her opponent and thumbed the trigger. Monstrous shells the size of trash cans poured from her Stormcrow's left arm autocannon into a combined Centurion, battering its armor mercilessly and sending the machine staggering backwards as its pilot struggled to keep it upright. It was a wasted effort. As she continued her barrage, smoke billowed from the other mech. Its heat sinks were rupturing, their chemical contents reacting violently with the air, and the fire starting in the mech's body. Within seconds, the smoke was so thick that she could no longer see the Centurion. Test of Vengeance, page 81, by Brian Neistel. The Stormcrow holds a special place in my heart and the substantial portion of my brain that still retains memories. It's right in there with a theme song to every 80s and 90s sitcom and cartoon, and my friend's old home phone number, even though I struggle to remember my own current cell number and stumble when someone asks me what my home address is. The pointless rambling is of course a feature and not a bug. Welcome to middle age, I suppose. I remember walking into the Games and Gizmos in downtown Bellevue with my father and quickly seeking out the BattleTech on the shelf. It had been just a few days or maybe a couple of weeks since my older brother brought home the 3rd edition BattleTech box set, and I was eager to see what else was out there. I left the store that day with 2 items. The first was the Clan Jade Falcon sourcebook, and the second was the Ral Partha Medium Omnimech box, which included our friend the Stormcrow. They were the first metal minis I ever owned, and even though I proceeded to assemble them with their feet on backwards, I cherished them. 30 plus years later, only the Nova and Ice Ferret are still in my collection. Somewhere across the myriad of moves and tribulations, the Stormcrow and Viper disappeared. Still, I look at those medium Omnimechs with an intense fondness that far outweighs any battle value. At PAX West this year, I saw the premium Stormcrow Mini and had to grab it purely out of an instinctual desire to relive those early 90s. It was a great example of mid-age cope, but this BattleTech video is not a therapy session, so let's just move on. The story of the Stormcrow begins long before the first examples of this incredibly popular Omnimech stomped off the assembly lines. When the members of the scientist cast within Clan Snowraven started to lay out the plans for this 55-ton monster, they were, inspired by a previously early Omnimech named the Omni Corvus. This was a 50-ton stutter step toward full Omnimech technology using the original 40-ton Corvus, which was developed by Clan House Horses back in 2845. This is well-trodden ground if you've watched the last few Clan Mech videos, so bear with me for the newcomers. Following Clan Coyote's successful development of the Omnimech technology in 2854, the other clans rushed to develop their own. Clan House Horses sought to cut their development short by taking the existing Corvus design and bulking it up. The Omni Corvus, which from now on I'm just going to call the O Corvus, was still in its prototyping and testing phase of its lifespan when the Ghost Bears arrived on Tokasha in 2921. The Bears wanted to take their turn at slapping the House Horses around like an unwanted franchise reboot. So desperate was the House Horses' position that the O Corvuses were deployed into the fight out of sheer necessity. With 21 tons of pod space and 8 tons of ferrofibrous armor, the mech could offer a surprise for the rampaging Bears. In a trial by fire, the mech fought in the tenacious defense of the Tokasha Mechworks Industrialplex Alpha. Ultimately, the House Horses saw defeat, but the available battle mech data and cockpit computer records show the O Corvus performed well. When the smoke cleared and Clan Ghost Bear looked over the spoils of their victory, the O Corvus was identified as an opportunity for further humiliation of the House Horses. The Bears broadcast the design specs and technical data to the other clans, completely negating any advantage that the horses might have had in producing this new mech. One of them, Clan Snowraven, saw potential in the battle mech and began their own program to create a medium Omnimech that could hopefully dominate the weight class. 9 years later, in 2930, the 55-ton Stormcrow marched off the assembly lines and into our hearts. Okay, maybe not all of our hearts, but a lot of them. In fact, the Stormcrow was one of the second-generation Omnimechs which saw widespread adoption across all of the other clans in either limited or widespread use. But why was this the case? Constructed from MH07E endosteel wrapped around a 330XL fusion engine, no expense was spared in creating an Omnimech which could maximize its pod space while still remaining swift and carrying decent armor coverage. 9.5 tons of H17-2 ferrofibrous armor plating to be specific. With a max speed of 97 km per hour and 23 tons of pod space, the Stormcrow was a good platform for a variety of possible missions. That's almost half of the weight of this mech on weapons. It's been a while since we talked about generalists and how they tend to survive better in a changing environment than creatures which are highly evolved into a single niche. There are few battle mechs that provide better evidence for this theory than the Stormcrow. At just half a ton short of the possible max armor, the Stormcrow was tough to bring down, especially when it could bring its typically hard-hitting weapons loadouts into play in return. With 29 internal locations and 10 built-in double heatsinks, there were plenty of options for clan warriors who wanted to play in the mech bay. One critique which really could hit hard for the mech outside of the universe is the mech's aesthetics. It's definitely one of the more alien-looking Omnimech designs, and one that significantly diverges from the more common man-in-armor look found across the mech pantheon. It has a low-built cockpit, high shoulders, those rear knee legs, and of course the dainty hands, which look almost vestigial, as picking up anything with them looks to be impossible from the early line art. I'm not going to dwell on it, but we don't love the Stormcrow because it's pretty. We love it because it's the North American Badger of Omnimechs. The primary configuration featured 2 ER large lasers and 2 ER medium lasers split between the left and right arms, with a third ER medium laser placed into the head critical location. To actually fire these lasers and not instantly overheat to shut down, 12 pod double heatsinks were added to the prime, pushing the total to 22. It's a Spartan, no fuss, no muss loadout, which further reinforces the theme of the day, which is effectiveness. There's no ammunition to worry about or fancy autocannons, it just wants to melt your face off like exiting a Las Vegas casino at 1 p.m. Able to hit at long range with both ER large lasers consistently without any heat buildup even on the run empowers the Stormcrow to be everyone's problem all the time. At mid-range, once those 3 ER medium lasers come into play, things only get more painful for the target. A full alpha strike while on the run left the Stormcrow prime at 0 heat. Yep, you heard me right, 0 heat. That's because the Stormcrow prime is technically oversynced. So if you are considering that next trial on a volcanic battlefield, the prime might be your date to the dance. Reports from early on in Operation Revival flat out stated that the Inner Sphere forces were not prepared to face down a medium mech that could consistently put out that much laser fire while on the move. Accurately hitting an Inner Sphere mech with both ER large lasers at max range couldn't be met with a response until the distance was closed, generally. Even then, getting through the Stormcrow's armor left the clan warriors all the time they needed to put down multiple targets of equivalent mass. Of course, the prime configuration was just one of the ways the Stormcrow could ruin your day. The alternate configuration A was more finely tuned to be a short-range brawler, trading in the extended range lasers for a collection of pulse lasers and missiles. Twin Streak SRM-6s split between the side torsos provided the opportunity to share high explosive with even very swift targets, and with a ton of ammunition for each launcher, it meant that it was unlikely it would stop through even a long battle. Backing up the streaks at all ranges was an LRM-20 launcher in the right arm, fed by 2 tons of ammunition in the same limb. Remember that clan LRMs don't suffer any minimum range penalties, so there was no safety in getting closer. Doing so with the A configuration was a surefire way to end up dispossessed, as the 4 medium pulse lasers in the left arm provided an accurate and powerful punch which could finish up what the missiles started. Type F in the video comments for all the light mech Inner Sphere mech warriors who discovered how much fun pulse lasers were when thinking they were going to do their usual lightning McQueening around the battlefield. If you need something big and loud to scare the neighbors, the Stormcrow B configuration was built around an Ultra AC-20 autocannon in the left arm. It offered that tantalizing prospect of hammering an opponent with 2 20 damage hits in the same turn, which is nice when looking at a 55-ton battle mech. It did come with a big asterisk though, as the B configuration only carried 2 tons of ammunition. That's 10 shots to make it count, especially if you start double firing in a tough moment. Thankfully, the B configuration isn't otherwise defenseless, as it was given 6 ER medium lasers in the right arm and 3 additional double heat sinks, make it possible to fire 5 of them while on the run and only end up +1 heat into the red. Tossing in the last one, and the UAC-20 landed the B config at 11 into the red, which is more of a challenge, but at least it's not in ammo explosion territory. If the moment is right, you gotta go for it. Overall, the B configuration is a heavy hitter that exchanges some of the durability for possibility of glory and hitting way above its weight. With this in mind, it was a great option for many clan warriors who were chasing that honor. If a big autocannon is not your flavor, the C configuration took things in a different direction with a more balanced build. The primary weaponry was a large pulse laser set into the right arm and an LB-10X autocannon in the left, fed by 3 tons of ammunition. At the shorter range, 2 medium pulse lasers split between the side torsos added additional punch. With just 10 double heat sinks, one might assume the C configuration would face some heat challenges with the pulse lasers, but a full alpha strike while on the run only nets +2 into the red. The overall damage potential might not be as high as the B, but with 30 rounds of LB-10X autocannon ammunition, the C can consistently pump out accurate fire. As an aside, if you're up and running with Mechwarrior 5 clans, the Stormcrow C is a great option for running around and causing mayhem. I've always had a fondness for the LB-10X autocannons in Mechwarrior games. I think it's a leftover connection to running around with a shotgun in the sharer version of Doom, but I digress. The C configuration is one of my favorite stock OmniMech configurations because it's simple yet a quality producer. The B configuration might occasionally score the winning touchdown, but the C config is the left guard who never lets the defense through. This is now a football video. Happy now, son? The last of the original configurations for the Stormcrow was the D config, which ended up the significant departure from previous loadouts. In what can be described as the missile boat variant, 2 LRM-20s dominate the arms and were fed by 3 tons of ammunition apiece. That's 18 shots for those of you like me who have trouble with basic math. At closer ranges, a pair of SRM-2s could join in on the fun, both with their own 1 ton of ammunition and all nestled in the left torso. Naturally, nothing bad could ever happen for storing 100 rounds of SRM ammunition in the side torso next to an XL engine. We're fine. This is all fine. Finally, a NARC missile beacon was added to the right torso and given 2 tons of beacons to fire at other mechs, buildings, infantry, rusted out cars, whatever you feel like, you do you. With its 10 double heat sinks, heat really isn't an issue for the D configuration. However, this niche build really does shift the mech into a more support role, as taking down targets with those LRM-20s would be an exercise in sandpapering without a heavier weapon to breach armor. When paired with a mech that can do that, say perhaps a Warhawk, the Stormcrow D configuration could be quite useful. Though if I were to tweak it in an act of pure editorialism, I'd pull a ton of that SRM ammunition and add an ER medium laser to give the mech at least a little punch. Kich Ranch, Boreal Continent, Tukayyid, Free Rossalhog Republic, 12th May, 3052. Lev Gerard tried to take a deep breath, but choked on the smell of rotten eggs. The mud that caked his Stormcrow's armor would wash off, but the stink of Devil's Bath might never go away. After this week, everything would be tinged with sulfur. A Comguard's mongoose zipped past him and he scoured it with laser fire. His autocannon ammo was long since exhausted, otherwise he'd have opened the mongoose like a tin can and sated some of his simmering rage. These were the new division of Comguards, not the hated 6th Division, laying dead to a man back in Devil's Bath, nor the other that fought with them, the 75th, 78th, it didn't matter. They were dead too, but their endless supply of white-clad brothers had come to avenge them or die in their turn. Gerard blasted the mongoose again at the extreme range of his lasers and barked a harsh laugh as it fell. H2SO4, Tukayyid, 3rd edition, page 82. As the invading clans swept through the periphery, the Stormcrow was well represented across their tumens. In those early days when the Inner Sphere forces were reeling from what seemed like an unstoppable foe, the mech earned the codenamed Ryokin from Draconis Combined Forces that encountered it. It translated to hunting dog, which fit well with the mech's versatility, speed, and ferocity when it chased down its prey. Good thing they didn't name it Meatun. With new conquests and enemies that did not play by the rules of clan warfare, new configurations for the Stormcrow were spotted. This included the P configuration, which showed up in 3049 in the first year of the invasion. This highlighted the mech's versatility as it could hammer opponents at all ranges with consistent fire. The 2 ER large lasers split between the arms were the long-distance threat, and with 2 additional pod heatsinks, the P configuration Stormcrow could fire them both several times before heat became an issue. After closing in on its victim, the P config could bring its 3 medium pulse lasers into play. 7 damage for just 4 heat and -2 improved accuracy makes for a very unpleasant day if you're running a light or even a medium mech that relies upon speed to survive. To add missiles to injury, 2 Streak SRM-6s were added to the mech, split between the side torsos and fed by 1 ton of ammunition in the left torso. Though said ammunition could go quick split between 2 launchers, the nature of the streak system makes each of those 15 shots count. The 12 double heat sinks are solid for general use, but once the pulse lasers and streaks are in play, it's likely that one or both of the 2 ER large lasers would need to take a backseat in the heat management rotation. They're really there to soften up the target for the close range stuff anyway. I foresee a star with a Stormcrow C and a P working together to bring down some really hefty prey. She fired on an approaching Rapier. Her LB-5X and Artemis-supported LRM launchers shredded armor off its nose, but the fighter barely flinched. Instead, it poured PPC fire into her, melting armor from her Stormcrow's right arm and leg. She fought to keep her mech upright and fired again. One cluster round hit the Rapier's cockpit, turning it red from the inside, and the fighter crashed to the ground. Around her, more and more enemy aerospace fighters either broke off or were destroyed by the Nova Cat's return fire. She noticed Star Commander Emmeline destroying multiple fleeing fighters and made a mental note to consider sponsoring her for a trial of Bloodright. But the clan's own losses were staggering. Into the Cat's Maw, Tukayyid 3rd edition, page 99. As the clan invasion went from cakewalk to quagmire, the universe was graced with not 1 but 2 Tukayyid Stormcrow configurations. When Star Captain Mia Atwater stepped out onto the surface of the planet, assumptions about an easy victory were pretty quickly put to bed. Under fire immediately from Comgar aerospace assets, her Stormcrow was in a uniquely advantageous position to return fire with a pair of LB-5X autocannons, which ripped into the diving fighters. The Nova Cats suffered considerable losses during their landings due to the aerospace intervention by the Comguard and unorthodox strategy of flying in their dropships and hovering over the surface of the planet while elementals and mechs exited the ships. Only the swift intervention from Atwater prevented a total wipeout of her unit, and even then almost the entire Alpha Galaxy command structure was wiped out before the battle could even really begin. Tukayyid was the place where clever and arrogant clan planning went to die. In addition to the twin LB-5Xs, the Atwater Stormcrow carried a pair of LRM-5s aided by an Artemis IV fire control system. It's been a long time since I saw this in an official loadout, but the single ton of LB-5X ammunition was actually placed into the Omnimech's head, presumably to prevent any sort of lingering suffering that might come should the Mechwarrior survive an ammunition explosion elsewhere. I cannot come up with a good reason why it's here beyond it's just the midway point between the 2 arms. There's even an open critical location in the right torso where it could go instead, but if you have a theory, let me know. Finally, 6 jump jets were added to the mech, making this our first official jumpy corvid of the day. At least the mech had that going for it. The Atwater Stormcrow is a very niche build that highlights how the clans were really not prepared for the battle that Tukayyid would become. Even if we ignore the incredibly low damage output for this design, 1 ton of ammunition for the autocannons and 1 ton for the LRM launchers was woefully inadequate for a prolonged campaign. Word has it that even Atwater ended up converting her Stormcrow to another variant while still on Tukayyid. So let's just move on to greener pastures. And those pastures will prove to be quite green as we get a gem of a configuration with the Stormcrow TC. I know there are several fans of it in the Discord channel, so let's dive in and make you guys happy. The TC Stormcrow was conceived as a variation of the B configuration. It swapped out the autocannon in favor of a Gauss rifle in the left arm, and it was fed by 2 tons of ammunition. The 4 ER medium lasers in the right arm added up to an impressive punch, and all 5 of the weapons were aided by a targeting computer installed into the left torso. The 11 double heat sinks were capable of bleeding off all but 1 point of heat in an alpha strike while on the run, so that made the TC configuration a persistent threat as it closed in on its target. Now before you yell at me in the comments, the TC was being used across the clan Tumans before Tukayyid, but from the Inner Sphere perspective, it's the first time this build was really noted. In a bit of tragic Smoke Jaguar history, a warrior using the TC configuration was one of the first to take a shot at the Comguard during the debacle in the Dinju Mountains. The Gauss rifle slug missed its first target, a white Comguard Marauder, and smashed into the rocks behind the battlemech. In a series of increasingly embarrassing misses, the warrior was such a lousy shot that after the battle his name was obliterated from Smoke Jaguar records and his gift take was destroyed so that there would be no chance of his genetics making it into future warriors. How's that for salting the ground at Carthage? It's probably a good thing for the warrior that he died in the Battle of Tukayyid, as his career prospects would have been pretty dire had he survived. Mentioned in the previous novel quote, Star Commander Emmeline Atwater was a Nova Cat who used the TC configuration during the campaign. Though her mech was eventually shot out from under her, she did survive the battle and was later taken as a bondswoman in a trial against Clan Wolf. Emmeline Wolf continued to use the TC Stormcrow. Fans of the Gauss rifle are going to find a friend with the TC, and it's a pretty solid build. The only significant drawback is the 16 tons of Gauss rifle ammunition, so one does need to be conservative with their shots in all but the shortest of trials. Overall, it's a pretty solid pick. Give it a try if you haven't already. Hopping down the timeline a bit to 3054, the Stormcrow E configuration highlighted the new advanced tactical missile technology with the installation of 2 ATM-9 launchers into the OmniMech. They were split between the arms and each had their own dedicated 3 tons of ammunition that could be tailored to meet the needs of the warrior inside. Backing up the missile launchers were 2 ER medium lasers split between the arms, 4 emotional support ER small lasers split between the side torsos, and an active probe added to the mech's head. Boy, that's a lot of emotional support. Anyway, 2 additional double heat sinks pushed the total to 12, which made it possible to fire both ATM launchers and the ER medium lasers while on the run and still end up at 0 net heat. Now, while both the E configuration and the D configuration are technically missile boats, the ability of the ATM to fire those 3 damaged short-range missiles significantly tips the balance in the favor of the E configuration. A max possible damage of 54 plus a possible 14 more with the ER medium lasers should give any possible foe pause to think about the decisions in their life that had gotten them there, perhaps pausing long enough to wish that they had filled out one of those death benefits forms for any next of kin before leaving on that mission. The 3050s are looking pretty good for the Stormcrow, so let's see if we can keep going with the last 3 of the decade's original configurations. Yep, there's 3 more in the 3050s. The next is the 3059 Configuration H, which adopted the heavy laser technology that seemed to show up in at least one of every clan OmniMech's resume. The 2 heavy large lasers split between the arms could hammer out to 15 hexes for 16 damage apiece, but at the cost of 18 heat generated per laser. Thankfully, the 12 additional pod heatsinks make firing them both viable even while on the run. Sharing the same range bracketing, 3 ER medium lasers were added to the mech, placed 1 into each arm and 1 into the head critical location. Firing everything while on the run net a 7+ into the red, which isn't horrifying, but also not something a mobile medium mech would want to do if there's a chance of being caught out in the open. Overall, the H configuration is entirely functional, but it will all boil down to how much you're willing to put on the line for those +1 accuracy penalty heavy lasers. That same year, the Configuration I returned to a more traditional loadout, which I have heard described as a mini Timberwolf. It carried 2 ER large lasers and 2 ER medium lasers split evenly between the arms and backed up by 2 LRM-15s located in the side torsos. Each launcher was fed by its own single ton of ammunition. Finally, an active probe was added to the head to help with any bothersome sneaky foes. The 3 additional heat sinks make the mech reasonably functional, but with the missile launchers and ER mediums each building 5 heat, choices will have to be made once the mech reaches the mid-range. Even just firing the ER larges and both LRM-15s left the I configuration at a net 8+ into the red, which means the mech is taking a -1 penalty to movement and firing accuracy in the next turn. It's a neat little build, but probably a bit too much for the mech. A recommended swap down to LRM-10s would buy enough mass for 2 additional double heat sinks. Probably worth it, but I'm no mathematician and this script is already 9 pages long. Seething with unutterable fury, she locked the Stormcrow's massive autocannon onto the center of the invader mech. A squeeze of the trigger sent a volley of high-explosive shells ripping into the Wyvern's thinner armor. The smaller mech staggered under the thundering impact. Kara gave the Luca warrior no time to recover. She leapt forward, snarling like her clan's enraged totem. Though her Stormcrow's arms were thin, almost spindly, they were possessed of great strength. Clenching her mech's right hand, she drove the steel fist hard into the Highlander mech's damaged shoulder. The Wyvern staggered under the blow. Again and again she battered at the enemy machine until it collapsed into a heap. Sword and Fire, Twilight of the Clans, Volume 5, page 201 by Thomas S. Gressman. Our last configuration of the 3050s was the personal loadout of a clan smoke Jaguar star captain by the name Bron Katari, who found himself on garrison duty on the planet Asgard in late May of 3059. Thinking his days as a smoke Jaguar warrior were pretty much over, Bron was correct, but not in the way he had assumed. When 10 dropships sporting the insignia of the Second Star League landed on Asgard, the defending smoke Jaguars were plunged into a fight for their lives. Bron fired his lasers at the lead mech, pushing his heat into the yellow. All 5 lasers reached across the defile, gigajoules of penetrating light seeking the crack in the Sunder's thick armor. Finding a flaw amid the already damaged armor, one laser cut through and speared an ammunition bin. Brilliant flashes erupted from the mech's chest as its SRM and autocannon rounds cooked off. The mech exploded, sending pieces of scalding steel everywhere, even as Krista and Eric fired past. The Cretans advanced undaunted. Cherry Blossoms, BattleTech 25 Years of Art and Fiction, page 183 by Adam Sherwood. With more and more of his warriors cut down ruthlessly in battle and his commanding officers wiped out, Bron called for a desperate retreat in his battered and damaged Stormcrow, but was blocked by assault mechs at a narrow pass. Though he fights valiantly, his poor Stormcrow is knocked out of action in a tough physical attack. His personalized configuration, known as the Kotar, mounted 5 ER medium lasers in the right arm. They were backed up by an LRM-20 in the right torso fed by 2 tons of ammunition and 2 Streak SRM-6s installed into the left torso and fed by 2 tons of their ammo. It carried 3 additional heat sinks which were needed, as firing all 5 ER medium lasers while running net 1+ into the red, and adding the missile launchers pushed that up to 15. While it doesn't risk an ammo explosion, it does significantly hobble the mech's movement and aim the next turn and risks a shutdown on 4+. Overall, it's an entirely respectable configuration. It is much cooler if you have the opportunity to read Cherry Blossoms in the BattleTech 25 Years of Art and Fiction book. My summary really doesn't do the short story justice. The battle itself, a bizarre sight. Battlemech torsos above the swirling sands, disembodied beings floating precariously. A Stormcrow came charging at Joanna's summoner, its right arm medium lasers sending a chain of beams at her. But the Stormcrow pilot must have been disoriented by the weather conditions, for its shots went wide. Joanna let the Wolf pilot fire again before responding with her LBX autocannon, sending a burst of cluster munitions at the light machine. I am Jade Falcon, page 209 by Robert Thurston. The next official configuration wouldn't hit the scene until 3068 with the Stormcrow G. Its claim to fame was the first official configuration to sport a hyper-assault Gauss rifle. In this case, the HAG-20 dominated the left arm and was fed by 2 tons of ammunition in the same limb. Backing it up in the mid and short ranges were 5 ER medium lasers in the right arm. The 6 additional pod heatsinks kept the mech cool as a full alpha strike while on the run left the G configuration at just -1 heat in the green. The only major downside to the G config was found in the HAG-20's 2 tons of ammunition, which means the weapon can only fire 12 times before the mech needs to find resupply. The combination of its bank of ER medium lasers and the scattershot damage of the HAG-20 could make for some decent hits, so long as the ammunition is used conservatively. If you're looking to try out the Hyper Assault Gauss, the G configuration is a solid pick without going all in on a heavier mech with a HAG-30 or 40. Hopping forward a year to 3069, the Stormcrow F configuration is our walking war crime entry of the day. It featured a pair of plasma cannons split between the arms, each fed by 3 tons of ammunition. They were backed up in the mid and short ranges by 4 ER medium lasers and 2 ER small lasers split between the side torsos. Finally, 4 anti-personnel Gauss rifles were split between the arms and fed by 2 tons of ammunition. The 2 extra pod heatsinks made it possible to fire most of the weapons consistently without serious heat buildup. The F configuration is definitely an anti-infantry build, and it would excel in that role. Otherwise, it could also menace energy build battlemechs pretty consistently. Plasma weaponry is just fun. You can have an F config as a little treat. The Stormcrow could usually hold its own against any comers, but it was currently bracketed by the Wolverine and a Comstar Crab, and had taken a critical amount of damage already. The Crab's claw-mounted large laser lashed out and speared the Stormcrow in the lower thigh, cutting deep into the control runs for the leg and causing it to lock up. The medium Omnimech took a final shuddering step, then crashed to the ground. The Wolverine was about to capitalize on the downed mech's misfortune when Kantos's LBX autocannon peppered him, causing the Wolverine to turn back to a more immediate threat. Two roads diverged. Page 45 by Michael Siervella. In 3072, the Z configuration Stormcrow was the beneficiary of several new pieces of technology. The most notable were the two improved Advanced Tactical Missile 9 racks split between the arms and each fed by 3 tons of ammunition. The improved ATM systems were developed by scientists within the secretive group known as the Society, who meshed the already successful and versatile Clan Coyote missile technology with existing Streak guidance systems. The IATMs function just as a Streak SRM launcher would. With a successful 2-hit roll, all the missiles will strike the target. If the 2-hit roll fails, the launcher fails to achieve a lock and does not fire. So while the Stormcrow Config Z carries 21 shots for each IATM launcher, that ammunition would go a long way and every missile really counted. Backing up the missile launchers were 2 medium improved heavy lasers split again between the arms. They offered 10 damage out to 9 hexes and didn't suffer that 2-hit penalty for the non-improved versions. A Nova CEWS was added to the head, which, if you're not already neck-deep in Homeworld Clan technology, was a combination of ECM, Active Probe, and C3I computer. Basically, it's all the electronic warfare goodies in one package with some limitations on the number of connections and the +2 to heat when turned on. Finally, the last goodie added to the Z configuration was a supercharger to the right torso, which pushed the Stormcrow's movement profile up to 612-0 when necessary. 2 additional heat sinks made the Z config a cool cucumber, and overall, it's a very interesting build. If you're bold and brave enough to wrap your brain around all the CEWS rules, this could be the Stormcrow for you. Moving on, we take a big leap down the timeline to 3120 with the Stormcrow Config K. By this point, the Stormcrow could be found across both Clan and Inner Sphere militaries due to the spread of formerly smoked Jaguar technology into the Combine and other great houses. As of the dawn of the IlClan era, the Stormcrow is still being produced by the Raven Alliance, and there was a production line on the Clan homeworld of Tokasha at Mechworks Gamma, but we're unlikely to get any new information anytime soon from what's going on there. The Stormcrow K configuration featured a Gauss rifle in the left arm, fed by 2 tons of ammunition located in the left torso. At short range, just 9 hexes, 4 medium improved heavy lasers in the right arm offered a possible 40 additional damage should the Dice God smile upon the Mechwarrior. The 5 additional pod heatsinks were quite capable of handling the heat generated, as a full Alpha Strike yielded only +1 heat into the red. While I'm not normally a huge fan of the heavy laser, the K configuration could be quite nasty if it's able to get close enough to a target. The Gauss rifle could end up being an extra treat in comparison to the 4 10 damage hits. Like so many of the other Stormcrow configurations, it's capable of hitting way above its weight and can be punishing if you'd let it get close. Now, if you're one that looked at the Stormcrow G configuration and was less than impressed by the HAG-20, the J configuration might be able to tempt you. The massive HAG-30 installed into the left arm offered a long-range punch, though in the form of 5-point clusters. Thankfully, it was aided in this endeavor by a targeting computer placed into the right torso. The only other weapon on the J config was a large improved heavy laser. Almost as an afterthought, right? That's 16 damage up to 15 hexes at a -1 to hit thanks to the targeting computer. So while the number of weapons seems rather short, the damage potential is quite high, with 30 in scattershot and another 16 in pinpoint damage. That combination could be quite powerful. The downside for the J configuration was the limited ammunition for the HAG-30, with only 8 shots. Every single volley is valuable. The targeting computer does help, but the J configuration would need to be used very carefully. Our final official configuration is the Stormcrow T config, and it shows up in the timeline in 3142. It's shockingly traditional in its loadout, but does have a couple of new bells and whistles. Its primary weaponry was a couple of large pulse lasers split between the arms and backed up by a medium pulse laser in the head critical location. At close range, 2 ER small pulse lasers split between the arms offered -1 accuracy and for 5 damage apiece. The 2 special bits for the configuration were the light active probe in the right torso and a supercharger placed into the left torso, pushing that movement profile up to 612-0 in a clinch. The 4 extra pod heatsinks were enough to keep the mech relatively cool and all with the most intense alpha strike moments. Overall, it's a solid IlClan era build, and exactly the kind of well-crafted utility I would hope to see from a good Stormcrow. Elsewhere, smoking mechs on both sides stalked over the battlefield. The Stormcrow that had killed his Timberwolf targeted the second Wolf Manowar. The mech had already been hammered in its duel with a Pillager, so when the Stormcrow's double shot hit it in the legs, eggshell-thin armor vaporized, allowing the projectiles to gnaw through the myomer muscles. The shells clipped one leg off at the knee and wrenched the other one so severely around in the socket that the Manowar spun around, then crashed down on its back. Prince of Havoc, page 85, by Michael A. Stackpole. Now before we move on, we do need to feed my ego with an MF configuration. My goal for this config was to incorporate some new tech to make the mech a little bit more an efficient hunter. The first item I added was a supercharger to improve the movement profile so it could chase down swift targets and close distances with bigger targets quickly. Its primary weapon was a large pulse laser in the right arm, backed up by 3 ER mediums. 2 were placed in the right arm and the third installed into the head critical location. For anti-infantry and the fun of setting things on fire, a plasma cannon was nestled in the left arm and fed by 2 tons of ammunition. Finally, 4 machine guns were added to the left torso and fed by a half ton of ammunition. The entire weapon setup was aided by the addition of a targeting computer in the right torso. With the 3 additional pod heatsinks, the Stormcrow MF can consistently fire all of its lasers without any heat buildup, and even adding the plasma cannon only pushes the alpha strike heat up to 3+ into the red. Overall, I think the Stormcrow MF would be a solid brawler and hunter of light mechs and infantry. If you want to give it a try, I've included the record sheet for it in the video notes below. If it melts faces, please let me know. So why do we love the Stormcrow? Personally, these Invasion-era Omni-mechs were the first pewter mechs I held, and that automatically sets them apart from their later peers. It's 55 tons of stompy fire and fury with some really great configurations. Additionally, whenever it shows up in the BattleTech lore, it tends to be giving better than it's getting. The Stormcrow is a great demonstration of function trumping form, as few would sound believable claiming it's an attractive design. It's just a nasty Omni-mech which offers the user plenty of options on how to dispense with enemies. How much more could you ask for from your 55-ton walking war machine? I expect the Stormcrow to stick around into the coming IlClan era, as well as the mechs it has inspired like the Ryokan 2 and 3, which are, their own video someday probably. Do you have a favorite Stormcrow configuration? Is there a story of tabletop glory thanks to its fire and fury? Let me know in the comments and we'll keep the discussion going. Thanks as always for coming by today as we talked BattleTech. If you haven't already, hitting that like or subscribe button will make sure that YouTube algorithm is happy, and as a result, you'll be much more likely to see my nonsense in the future. Going the extra step and becoming a channel member or supporting on KoFi will go a long way to make sure I can keep this venture going. I really appreciate it and the opportunity to do my part to support BattleTech. With that, I'll say good day, please be good to each other, and go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.